Order, order. I call Bell Ribeiro-Addy to move the motion.
Thank you very much, Mr. Brady, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairpersonship. I'd like to thank the Backbench Business Committee first for allowing this vital debate, and extending my thanks also to the members who supported the application and have joined to participate today. So to some, this might just be another debate, but for black and minority ethnic communities, holding this debate in Parliament shows that we recognise here and celebrate that history and their achievements right across the UK and across the world. And I sincerely hope that general debates to celebrate Black History Month will become a regular fixture on the parliamentary calendar. This year's theme for Black History Month is Proud to Be, and I think this is so important because so many are made to feel uncomfortable about their ethnic heritage, cultural history and language, seen by others or felt that to be seen by others as that other, an inferior or a minority. But black people have so much to be proud of culturally in the way that we've contributed to British history, and we ought to be proud to be both black and British. My honourable friend, the member for Erith-and-Thamesmead, in her adjournment debate last week highlighted several black British individuals who make us feel proud, and I'm sure colleagues today will no doubt mention several more individuals that have made significant contributions to our nation's history and that we also ought to be proud of. So from Yvonne Connolly, the UK's first black head teacher, to C.L.R. James, the renowned author, from William Cuffey, the leading figure of the Chartist movement, to my right honourable friend, the member for Hackney North and Stoke Newington, the first black woman to be elected to this Parliament, we see figures that reflect the diversity of our country and that we can all be proud of. And the UK has its own rich civil rights history, which my generation, and unfortunately those before me, were never formally taught about and have had to take it upon ourselves to learn. Not recognising yourself in your history can have a serious impact on your identity. How are we expected to feel proud to be if by omission we are shown that the contributions of black people are not worth being taught in our schools? Colleagues may be aware of the petition circulated last year calling for the UK to teach Britain's colonial past as part of the curriculum. Now, this achieved over 260,000 signatures, and along with similar petitions, it means that the teaching of black history in schools has received the most support of any parliamentary petitions in our history. And that is very, very clear, and obviously that appetite hasn't waned at all, because more than 660 schools in England alone have now signed up for a diverse and anti-racist curriculum developed by teachers and council staff in the London Borough of Hackney. The Black Contribution is what it's called, aims to teach young people not just about the history of black people, but fundamentally about a history that we all share, because as I hope you would have heard many times throughout this month, black history is British history. And I think it would be a perfect time to pay tribute to the Labour government in Wales that has now instituted black history as part of its curriculum. And seeing that they have led the way and seeing just how much support it has had, I just can't understand why the government still refuses to commit to putting black history in the curriculum when there is so much widespread support. And perhaps in response to today's debate, the Minister can inform us of the reason why the government refuses to take action on this. Instead, unfortunately, what we've seen is discussions descending into a so-called war on woke and culture wars and other very, very bizarre claims about the phrase of white privilege and how it's affected us and the idea that it's being widely taught in schools. And firstly, if you actually speak to teachers, you'll find out that that's not actually a feature in any of the lessons. You don't hear about children running home from school talking about it, or indeed teachers, asking Timmy, what's 1 + 1? Timmy says 2, and the teachers say, aha, Timmy, you knew that answer because it's white privilege. You don't hear such nonsense. That's not what's happening in our schools. And secondly, the idea that teaching children about race inequality, as some teachers will do during Black History Month, is not what's holding back working class children in our education system. It wasn't teaching racism that closed down hundreds of youth services or cut funding per pupil in this country. That was this government. It's these policies that hold back working class children from all of our communities. Now, I completely understand why this government may not want to talk about race, especially if it's about their record on race, but ignoring these issues will not lead to the post-racial society that some people believe that we are living in. We actually have to address them. We have to address past issues of slavery and colonialism and their lasting impact, that is the racism we face today, and we have to do it via education and other means. I would be proud to be part of a parliament that finally apologised for the atrocities of slavery and colonialism. And yesterday I was pleased to officially launch the all-party parliamentary group on African reparations, looking forward to policy on this. Now, Cambridge University, and quite proudly so, recently returned 2 of the looted Benin bronzes. But there are over 3,000 in this country, and 900 alone in the British Museum. Reparations begins with things such as that, giving back these things that do not belong to us. Now, we know that over the past few years in particular, there have been no shortage of discussions about racial disparities. We have had debates about the impact of COVID on black and ethnic minority communities. We've had debates about the need to teach black history as part of the curriculum. We've had debates on racial disparities in maternal health outcomes, and on the ethnicity employment gap, and on the ethnicity pay gap. And of course, the Black Lives Matter protests, a tragic reminder that racism can be a matter of life and death. And time again, we have raised the ongoing racial disparities in the UK, and time again, we've called on the government to act. But the response has been felt to be full of platitudes and empty gestures, and a report, quite famously, that told us that systemic racism doesn't exist, and in some ways actually attempted to create some racial divides. Now, given that the CRED report actually, although it seems we've talked about it quite a lot, was only just released earlier this year, it would be amiss if I didn't mention it here, and say that, as far as I'm concerned, it turns back the clock on ending racial inequality. There are other reports and inquiries that have outlined how racism continues across UK society, and report after report outline the social causes, the political failings that underpin it. Now, sweeping away these decades of work with one report doesn't... Yes, I will give way.
Can I congratulate my honourable friend, and also congratulate on the amazing speech that she's already given. But she alludes to the fact that there have been multiple reports into racial inequality in this country. And does she agree with me that if the government just took some time and look at beginning to implementing some of those recommendations, just maybe we might begin to make some headway on racial inequality?
Ribeiro-Addy.
Thank you. My honourable friend is absolutely right. And if we had gone down that road, perhaps we would not be having the discussions that we're having today. And we need to think about what it said in that report when we decided that there was no institutional or systemic racism by writing that down, and how that actually discounts years of lived experience and the things that people from black, Asian and minority ethnic backgrounds have experienced in this country. And what I couldn't understand at the time is whether the government actually believed that they would have any buy-in from a report that's so widely discredited across our communities, and how much, given the discredit of the report that has happened, how much actually the report was for our communities, even though it was very much about our communities. And the idea that institutional racism doesn't exist means that there is no action for the state to take because it's not an institutional problem. So as far as I'm concerned, it appears as if the government are absolving their responsibility as the state to take action on institutions that fail in their racial equality, in delivering racial equality. Now, we didn't need this report. What we needed was action on the reports gone by, and we certainly didn't need a new story about slavery and colonialism when the one that we have at the moment is not even being widely taught. Now, my honourable friend pointed to the recommendations of reports that have gone by that haven't been implemented. And actually, my honourable friend, the member for Tottenham, reminded me that the government has continued to stall on fully implementing the Lamy review. And in the meantime, we've seen BAME youth custody now sitting at 51%. And that's an increase of 10% since he was asked to do the review just 5 years ago. To add to that, the Windrush scandal and the Wendy Williams Lessons Learned review, something else that the government actually commissioned. Again, even the author of the report is saying just how woeful it is that the government haven't continued to act on those recommendations, and actually that the scandal continues as many people caught up in the scandal have not yet received compensation and have not yet received their proper status to remain in this country. Yes, I will give way.
Grateful to my honourable friend, and I would congratulate her on getting this very important debate. When we're talking about reports and inquiries that have not been implemented, we can go all the way back to the early 80s and the Scarman inquiry. And if everything that Scarman spoke about had been addressed, we would not be in the situation we are today.
Ribeiro-Addy.
Thank you. My honourable friend is absolutely right. And I think that's what we want to finally bring to an end. We have to stop this cycle of something bad happens, we have a report or inquiry, and governments, and I'll say successive governments, just push it under the carpet and wait till the next disaster where racial inequality is raised. And I think part of the reason why we are not making headway is that the bodies that are actually meant to protect us, the bodies that are actually meant to apply checks and balances on the government, simply don't have the ability to do that. Now, the Human Rights Select Committee report, Black People, Racism and Human Rights, actually said that overall that there was a very, very damning and familiar picture of structural racism right across society, from health, immigration, policing, the justice system and electoral participation. It also mentioned quite key, in a quite key way, the failures of the Equality and Human Rights Commission. Now, the Equality and Human Rights Commission are tasked with policing equality and potentially enforcing such targets, but it's not currently fit for purpose in its current form. And how could it be? Firstly, it's meant to be an independent arm's-length body, and its major appointments are still made by the government. This must make it difficult to take action when the government policies lead to inequalities or human rights breaches, something which has been highlighted in many, many court cases over the past few years. The HRC also appears to have rarely used and limited investigation and enforcement powers, and has an ever-dwindling budget. It has effectively become a body with no teeth. And my work on the Women and Equalities Select Committee has found that when people, and the government included, refuse to comply with what they're meant to do in equalities legislation, there's very little, it seems, that the Equality and Human Rights Commission can do. Most key to that is just over the main purpose that we are here every day passing legislation. This government does not produce equality impact assessments on various pieces of legislation, and when it does, at times it refuses to publish them. How on earth are we meant to hold the government to account and ensure that it is complying with our equalities law, and why does our equalities law always have to be an add-on? Quite frankly, our black communities need less champions and more enforcement of what are supposed to be the rights that protect us. And report after report reinforces not only these issues, but the recommendations that we need to bring about this systemic change. And if we are to take our equalities legislation, the guidance that we've been set out clearly, we would be moving forward towards this. Now, when we raise these issues, when we discuss racial inequality, and when we call on the government to introduce policy to change things, we're not asking for anything beyond equality. We're simply asking that the government recognises how we are treated as a community in this country and takes meaningful action to change it. Likewise, when we ask the government to teach black histories as part of the curriculum, we're not asking them to do so over other aspects of British history. We're asking them to recognise that black history is British history. It's part of that history, and to recognise that it is not taught widely in the way that it should be, and to take those key steps to ensure that it is done. And if racism is ignorance and education is the absence of ignorance, the obvious answer to dealing with racial inequality is simple, and it costs the government nothing to make a commitment to start just there with education. Thank you very much.